Welcome to Eat, Drink, Think. I'm Amy O'Neill Hauk. In this podcast from Edible Communities, a network of magazines published across North America, we celebrate all things local and sustainable in the food world. This episode of Eat, Drink, Think is brought to you by Teton Waters Ranch, a longtime partner of Edible Communities. Their 100% grass-fed beef is better for the land, better for the animals, and better for you. Like us, they believe good food starts with good stewardship of soil, community, and conscience. Learn more at tetonwatersranch.com. The term grass-fed beef has a romantic aura about it, bringing to mind expansive pastures and contented cattle. It can also signal health, animal welfare, and agricultural practices that put planet before profits. But in the U.S., there's no set definition of grass-fed, and no regulation keeping producers from claiming without proof that their cattle has lived on pasture. It's a lot for a consumer who's seeking an affordable, delicious, healthy meal to juggle. Kevin Pallaoro, CEO of Teton Waters Ranch, is here today to help. Kevin grew up on a ranch in Colorado, and his interest in cattle was encouraged with his membership in 4-H. Before coming to Teton as CFO in 2022, Kevin worked in finance at various food companies in the U.S. In his current role, he oversees both the Teton Waters Ranch and Sun-Fed Food brands of grass-fed beef. And he's got a lot to say about the importance of truly grass-fed beef, regenerative farming, and good food. Kevin, welcome to Eat, Drink, Think.
Hi, Amy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So I mentioned briefly that you grew up around cattle. Can you give us a little more background about your interest in ranching, but also what led you to pursue a career in food and finance?
Well, I kind of feel like food and finance found me. My sister and I own a cattle ranch here in Colorado where she and her family take care of the land and raise the cattle. I love to support the land and the cattle and the business, but my interests really have been on being able to scale the food system. Like I said, food seems to have found me as much as I wanted to move away from the ranch and go do big, bold things. It just seemed like every time I turned a corner, I kept finding myself in food. So was in the meatpacking industry for a number of years. And then I spent like 6 years with one of the largest organic produce companies in the nation, where I just really, truly loved what doing good for the planet, doing good for our environment, and doing good for our bodies can do. And when my time there ended, I was like, man, I went to a couple different places, like an ice cream company and a plant-based meat company, and they just didn't feel legitimate. They didn't feel like we were doing the right things. And I wanted to reconnect, really reconnect back to nature with what I was doing, and found the role at Teton Waters Ranch, where it just seemed like a natural fit. And I've always been super passionate about grass-fed beef. I've always been super passionate about doing the right things. And, over the last couple of years here, I think that passion came through and was able to make a transition from the finance role to truly leading the company, because it's something I truly believe in and I'm truly passionate about.
That's great. And what about Teton Waters Ranch? Today, the company is a producer of grass-fed beef products as opposed to a single ranch raising cattle. Can you give us a little background about how it got started and became the company it is today?
Yeah. So Teton Waters Ranch started over a decade ago. It actually started in the Tetons on the Idaho side, where the Teton Waters ran through the ranch. And originally it was purchased by a man that they purchased it for a subdivision. And when the market had crashed, and they were like, well, maybe we'll raise some cattle on here and raise some things for a while the market returns. And it was an old potato farm. And what they found was that land was pretty much decimated. Like year after year after year of monocropping, the land was pretty barren, and started bringing the cattle on, started doing ranching right, and saw the land beginning to reflourish. And so with the cattle and the land, they started selling meat to, local restaurants in Jackson Hole, things like that, and thought, hey, we really got a business here. And over the years, I'll say this, the meat industry is a tough industry. It's one of the only industries where you're not putting things together, you're taking things apart. And, as much as everybody loves a wonderful tenderloin or strip loin or ribeye, you can't harvest an animal for just that. Like, there's hundreds of pounds that come off of it. And if you don't have a really good, legitimate home for all those pounds, you're going to struggle as a business. And that company, Teton Waters Ranch, did struggle for years and years, and eventually said, hey, how do we use more of this animal and make it more accessible for people? And that's when the idea of the hot dogs and the sausages and those kinds of things came about. It got to a point that part of the business just absolutely exploded, and there weren't homes for the ribeyes and the tenderloins and the strip loins and those expensive cuts, and it just didn't make sense to continue harvesting cattle on that sense, and there just wasn't enough grass-fed around. So the company pivoted to, importing a decent chunk of its grass-fed meat, because there was so much more accessibility coming out of other countries that had the climates that could do that on a full scale. As you can imagine, having thick, lush grass in the Teton Mountains in the middle of winter, pretty difficult. Versus if you kind of go to places like Australia and parts of South America where they're more in the tropical zones, you can have grass year round and really have a nice, healthy animal that's doing good for the planet. And so that pivot was made.
So, and we'll come back to talking about the products a little bit later, but can you tell us about that idea of American grass-fed ranching? Is it part of Teton Waters Ranch's mission to encourage more of that to happen, while at the same time it's bringing in this high-quality grass-fed beef from elsewhere?
Absolutely. Grass-fed in the U.S. it's one of the things that surprisingly is not regulated hardly at all. There were regulations around the definition of grass-fed up until about 2016. And then a rule changed where those regulations went away. And so really the definition around grass-fed in the U.S. is pretty loose, and in other countries it's more strict. And what I'd say is every single animal, every single cow is grass-fed up to a point in its life. So like on our ranch, these animals walk around, they eat grass all summer long. We put up hay in the summer, so then there's hay and feed for the animals to eat in the winter. And, that helps get them through. And, one of the things that's just kind of gone on in the last 50, 70 years is that we've gotten so focused as a country on efficiency and driving efficiency that we've kind of lost connection to the land and what's best for the animal and those kinds of things. And one little known fact that I think a lot of people don't know is that there are actually less cattle today in the United States than there were in 1952. There's a lot more people in the United States, but less cattle. And one might ask, well, are we just eating less beef? And you're like, no, we're not eating less beef. What's happened is through the current system, the average weight of every animal going through the processor has gone up by almost 30%. So you take these animals, pack them into feedlots where it's not healthy, pack them really full of high density food, almost like feeding them candy for a couple months, make them really fat, get that white fat, and then send them off. And so you're getting more pounds than you did in 1952 off less animals, but it's not very healthy. And I've actually heard of studies that I have not seen them that where they've taken some animals from the feedlot that were, fully finished, brought them back to the land, and within less than 12 months, they've died of a heart attack. And that's how unhealthy some of those animals were. I do think in the US, we're starting to make a pivot back to better for you animals, better for the animals, and better nutrition coming out of those animals. Personally, I don't want to go eat something that is on the brink of a heart attack. I believe you are what you eat, and I'd rather eat something that is healthy and, young. And and so, I would love to see the point where we start seeing a lot more grass-fed here in the U.S., and we are trying to help encourage as many people as we can to make that, but also make it legitimate. So through, third-party validation, working with different entities, making grass-fed more legitimate. But it's an uphill battle today, and I think that'll change over the next few years. But as you think about less cattle today than there were in 1952, that makes the cattle market really, really good. And with the high price of cattle and the longer time that you have to hold a grass-fed animal, to have somebody say, okay, I'm going to convert my farm or my ranch to grass-fed, we're going to feed these out. There's some opportunity cost there. And farmers, it's a tough life and they don't make a lot of money. And so to say, hey, I'm willing to pass on what is the best cattle market in U.S. history and send these cattle to the feedlot, I'm willing to pass on that for maybe a better return at some point in the future. That's a hard sell.
Have you found that having your market available to ranchers has provided some sort of safety net that encourages that kind of production?
I think it's starting. We're getting more and more ranchers on board in the U.S., but it's small. Mm-hmm. In Australia, in particular, where we have a lot of deep partnerships, we've been able to get more and more people on board with the humane practices that we require and the third-party validations that prove that you're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. I'd say in the U.S., kind of given the current market, it's definitely been more of a challenge. And mm-hmm. I'd encourage, your listeners, if you know people raising beef on a scale, point them our way because we want more American beef. Absolutely. It's the challenge is finding it.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons we're chatting today is that Teton Waters Ranch is developing new regenerative humane standards. And before we chat about that, let's back up a little bit and get on the same page about what we mean when we talk about grass-fed, regenerative, and those things, especially when it comes to beef. Can you talk about Teton's definitions of those terms and maybe tell us why you think there's no universally accepted definition of regenerative and grass-fed?
Well, there's not really a body out there truly setting the standards. So we're trying to set the standards by using third parties and those kinds of things. And one thing I would say is we are a very mission-driven and values-driven company. Kind of growing up on a farm, values were just beaten into me almost. And so to us, it's just doing the right thing. And because there's not really a governmental definition today, I think there's a lot of greenwashing going on. And so our definition of grass-fed is the animal has always had continual access to grass and true grass. So a lot of the definitions, say no grains, but that means that you can feed them byproducts of other kinds of things. That's not us. Ours is 100% grass, 100% of their life, and never confined, which is big. So I think, we're getting closer and closer to seeing some standardization, but if you just say, what is grass-fed? Well, every cow is grass-fed at some point. Grass-fed and grass-finished means that it ate grass through its entire life, as long as, these companies are being legitimate. Pasture-raised should mean that they have open access to pasture through its entire life. And one thing that's kind of concerning to me is in the U.S., one of the largest grass-fed providers is they essentially take the cattle that are ready to go to the feedlot anyways, they put them in a feedlot and they feed them grass pellets. That, to me, doesn't meet the definition of grass-fed. Like, yes, is it eating grass? Sure. Is that the right nutrition for the animal and doing what's right for the animal and what we think gets the best nutrition into our bodies? Probably not.
So for Teton Waters Ranch, it's not just what is happening or what it is fed to the animal, but it's about what's not happening. They have to not be in confinement ever, it sounds like.
Correct. Never confined. Always have continual access to grass. And I would love to say fresh grass, but, weather permitting, sometimes there needs to be hay. Sometimes there's droughts and they need to supplement with, we will allow occasional supplementation with grass pellets as long as that's not the continual diet, but it's only in instances of like extreme drought or for some reason, like you cannot get them to the proper nutrition.
And what do you say about the word regenerative? Do you have a meaning that you use as a framework?
I'd say our meaning is doing what's right for the land, and science has helped proving that. So regenerative to us is, number one, like no tilling. As you think about farming and ranching today, especially in the U.S., we're a very high till. As you go and look through, drive through the Midwest and in the spring and you see all the tilling going on and all the dust in the air, that is organic matter floating away. That's topsoil floating away, and that's carbon floating away. So we're actually putting more carbon in the air by tilling. So for us, regenerative is all about continual coverage of the ground with native species of grasses, legumes, plant life that is essentially sucking carbon out of the air and putting it back into the ground. It's rotational grazing, so moving the cattle from one lot to the other, never letting things, the soil become exposed. And through a lot of our partnerships and ranches that we've worked with, they take soil tests. And one in particular that I was visiting a ranch a couple of months ago. It was one of the ones for one of the new product lines we're trying to work on coming out with. And over the last 10 years, they went from having about an inch of topsoil to it was almost 9 inches of topsoil. And that is carbon coming out of the air, going back into the ground. And that property was one of the most beautiful properties I've ever seen. And it just shows when you treat the land right, when you treat the animals right, how it can make the world a better place.
And longtime listeners to the show will realize that we've talked about how that amount of topsoil also creates some climate resilience for what's going on right now as far as larger climate events and things like that. Does Teton have is part of your mission climate related, and can you talk about that?
Yeah. So our mission is better for the animal, better for you as the consumer and better for the planet. So if something that we're doing doesn't check all those boxes, then we probably shouldn't be doing that. We have been working on some new standards. So today, most of the standards have really been focused on the definition of grass-fed and what's better for the animal. And the new standards that we've been working on rolling out are encouraging and helping validate that you're also doing what's better for the planet. So encouraging regenerative farming, validating that you're doing the right thing. And if done right, there should be carbon credits and other ways to create revenue streams for these farmers out there that they don't have today. So it's bringing resilience back into the farm. So, making the transition to grass-fed regenerative farming, probably in the short term, going to cost you money. Longer term, if you can prove that you're sequestering carbon and capturing those kinds of things, there could be added benefits that a lot of people aren't taking advantage of.
And are these going to be published standards? Is that the plan?
That is the plan. We're working on getting final approval from the USDA, and then the standards will be published, and then every producer will work on, getting to those standards over the next 12 to 18 months. So I think 90% of them will probably meet the standards today, and then working to make sure that we get the others to it and bringing more on. And one thing we've tried to do is make the standards a little bit more broad, because there are third parties out there today, like the Teton line today has one certification, but a lot of these ranchers and farmers, they don't want to have 10 different certifying bodies come to their farm. They just want to do what they want to do. And almost every single one has a certifying body coming out for something. So can we have that certifying body check the box for us as well, versus having just one certifying body on our package?
And how does organic fit into your framework and philosophy?
I love organic. I think that organic is what is best for the planet. I think the synthetic fertilizers, the pesticides, the herbicides are very, very harmful. Personally, my family and I buy organic whenever possible. There's always flexibility there because sometimes things aren't available and those kinds of things. But I think organic is the gold standard. And I think that, as a company, that's something we're actually moving towards. Not all the products, but a lot of the products. Organic is more expensive just to operate. It's a tougher thing for people to do, but it's the right thing. And I think it's the right thing for nutrition and those kinds of things. So, today the Teton line is not organic. And I imagine that the core line will continue to not be organic, because one of our goals is to make our food as accessible to as many people as we can. And if we keep adding expenses and adding other attributes, it becomes less and less accessible. But we are looking to launch a new line that includes organic. So for those that can pay for what is even more nutrient dense, better for the animals, those kinds of things, we want to bring those to the market. And that's something that we're hoping to get into the market probably as early as mid to late 25.
But organic certification aside, if someone is keeping cattle on native grasses, they're likely not spraying them. They're not needing to fertilize or use pesticides anyway. Isn't that right?
Correct. Yeah, I'd say a lot of the product today is really, really close to organic. And we've talked to a lot of farmers that are like, well, I'm basically organic. I don't spray anything like that. And I completely agree with them. But U.S. laws dictate a very strict definition of what is and what is not certified organic. and they're very, very strict. Like, if you look around the U.S. today and you want to find certified organic grass-fed beef, it's going to be a real challenge to find anything that's truly from the U.S. because the guidelines are very, very strict. So grass-fed, a lot of it is pushing towards that direction, but I'd say to hit the true USDA definition of organic, very little is out there and available that truly hits it, especially U.S. domestic cattle.
So in a letter to consumers on the Teton Waters Ranch website, you wrote, "For a society to thrive economically, there must be continued growth. Yet the growth of the population and economic growth, tied with the desire for more convenience, higher yields, and more consumption, means we're leaving a swath of wreckage in our wake. I believe that as a society, we've become so obsessed with wealth that we've lost sight of what truly matters, relentlessly doing the right thing." And you've mentioned doing the right thing a few times while we've been talking, so I can see that it's really important to you. It's not unusual for corporations to communicate visions of a better world, but it's more unusual for a CEO to speak out in the first person about the risk and dangers of society's current mode of consumption. So I'm wondering, do you feel pushback about doing the right thing? And how's that going for Teton Waters Ranch?
I mean, luckily we're a smaller company, and you know, our investor partners and the people we work with have a longer term view on things versus there's a lot of people out there that have very short term views. So I haven't had a lot of pushback, and I think that the people that we're working with have similar missions. They want to make the world a better place. And the only way you can do that is by living your values and trying to encourage as many people to live their values as well. And so as I wrote that, it was really me just reflecting on how did we get to this point that we're at, where we say, well, we need regenerative farming because the topsoil's depleting. We need humane standards because we're cramming all these animals into tiny feedlots and filling them full of candy. Like, that doesn't feel right to me. And I think to most consumers, like, that doesn't feel right to them. And as I sometimes take a step back and like, well, how did we get there? And it's like, well, as Americans, like, we're obsessed with wealth. And I get it. Like, I want to be wealthy. I don't need to be crazy wealthy, but I want to have a comfortable life for myself and my kids and my family. And I'm okay with just doing the right thing and not being a billionaire. But all the headlines, everything you see is like how is it that you can get rich fast? And I was in my daughter's school, they were talking about, you know, the number one career aspiration now is to be an influencer. And like, really, like, what are you going to influence? And are you influencing to make something better, or are you influencing because that's the fastest way to be wealthy? And I really truly believe if we took a step back and be like, well, we don't all need to be billionaires. We don't all need to be multimillionaires. And if maybe we just did the right thing for the people around us, for our communities, for our animals, for our planet, we might not be in this stage where we feel like we gotta fix everything. But we are at the stage where I do think we need to fix everything, because if we don't start making substantial changes in the way that we live and the way that we consume, we're probably in for a world of hurt.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like potentially we consumed our way into this problem, but maybe since we all have to eat, there's a way that we can also kind of consume our way out of it by making, by companies springing up like yours that are doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think, and as I think of, you know, the word consume, I think of everything. I don't think that like we ate ourselves into this problem. What I do think is that we've bought a lot of stuff, unnecessary things into this. And where we have ate ourselves into this problem is just the overall food system is kind of been designed around influencing as high of consumption as possible. You know, super salty snacks, super sweet things that are unnaturally appealing to the human brain, so you can consume more and more and more and more. Where like if you eat good, healthy, nutritious food that's high in protein, high in vitamins, one of the reasons I like regenerative and organic foods is you can actually start proving through lab analysis that they're higher in the micronutrients, so the vitamins and the minerals and the irons and those kinds of things that have been depleted out of the food. And when you start getting the nutrients you need and the proteins you need and the omegas that you need, you don't eat as much because your body's getting what it needs. So today, are we overeating as a society? Yeah, probably. If you had the right things on your plate, consistently for months and months, would your consumption of just overall calories go down? Probably.
So speaking of the right things on the plate, maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the offerings that Teton Waters Ranch has and maybe some of the ones that you're most excited about.
Yeah. So, we're kind of in the growth stage, and goal number one, coming back to where we started, was just making grass-fed accessible for people. And what's a more accessible thing than hot dogs, sausages? We just came out with a hamburger patty at Whole Foods. So really, really easy, accessible things that are just great for families and that they can grab. And the other thing is, when grass-fed is becoming on trend more now, but when Teton started, grass-fed was more niche, and most consumer sentiment was like, I don't like grass-fed, it's gamey, or the flavor's off-putting. And that's part of the reason that the hot dogs and the sausages worked, is because you kind of got over that, like, it's a different flavor than what the American consumer has been used to for the last 50 years eating for beef.
The gateway sausage.
Exactly, the gateway sausage. And I think that point is starting to shift where people are like, I want grass-fed because I actually like the way that it tastes. And I like that it's more natural. And I like that there should be more vitamins and minerals and higher omega-3s and less omega-6s. And so now that that's changing, we're starting to try to make more offering to appeal to those consumers as well. So what I'm the most excited about is the line that we're working on getting out right now, which is our certified organic, certified regenerative, so all third-party backed ground beef. So just a brick that you could buy at the store, 1 pound brick, that is truly validated that it is kind of the pinnacle of grass-fed beef. And so that's something I'm super excited about. And we're getting really close to getting that in with one of our major retailer partners, and hopefully it hits by the end of the summer.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay, last question. It's your night to cook. What's for dinner?
Well, every night's my night to cook because I'm a food guy. So what's for dinner on my night to cook? In all transparency, it's not a hot dog or a sausage because I eat those for lunch pretty much every single day. So even when my daughter's like, Dad, can we have hot dogs? You're like, oh, I've had like 17 hot dogs this week. So probably, if I have the time, my favorite thing to cook is a brisket. Like, spend about 12 hours on the smoker. I have a big green egg. Really cook that thing low and slow. And I really enjoy kind of the process of a simple cut of beef that you can smoke, and then when it comes off, just nice and juicy. So that's probably would be my answer.
All right, we'll be right over. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. This was really, really, really fun, and I appreciate your time.
We've been speaking with Kevin Pallaoro, CEO of Teton Waters Ranch. Thank you for joining us today at Eat, Drink, Think. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to pick up your local edible magazine. You can find show notes for today's episode at ediblecommunities.com.